I was staring at my laptop screen when my phone buzzed that Tuesday evening, the glow of spreadsheets and engineering reports burning into my retinas after another 12-hour day. Mom's name flashed across the display, and I felt that familiar tug of obligation mixed with dread. I already knew what she wanted before I even answered. "Sarah, honey, come home for dinner tonight. Your father grilled steaks," she said in that tired voice I'd grown to recognize over the past few months. There was something else in her tone, something I couldn't quite place, but I was too exhausted to analyze it. I told her I'd be there in 40 minutes, saved my work, and grabbed my keys. The drive from my office in downtown Omaha to my parents' house in the suburbs had become routine over the past 3 years since I'd moved back from Chicago. After my engineering firm there had downsized, I'd returned home, telling myself it was temporary. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of living in my childhood bedroom, 3 years of contributing to every household expense, while my parents quietly accepted it as if it were my duty, 3 years of watching my younger brother Mark drift from one failed venture to another, while somehow remaining the golden child. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Mark's truck was there, which was unusual for a Tuesday. The beat-up Ford F-150 he'd bought with money I'd loaned him 2 years ago, money he'd never paid back, sat at an awkward angle blocking half the driveway. He and his girlfriend Tiffany had their own place across town, a townhouse they'd somehow managed to afford despite Mark's spotty employment history as a construction worker who seemed to spend more time between jobs than actually working. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I pushed it aside and walked in through the front door. The smell of grilled meat hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of Mom's roasted vegetables and that particular mustiness that came from the old carpet I'd been begging them to replace for months. Dad was already at the table, his weathered hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable in that way he had when he'd already made a decision and wasn't interested in discussion. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, and I noticed her movements were more frantic than usual, the way she moved when she was anxious about something but didn't want to talk about it. I set my purse down on the console table I'd bought them last Christmas, the one that replaced the rickety old stand that had been falling apart. I'd spent $300 on it at Pottery Barn, wrapped it carefully, presented it with a card. Dad had grunted his thanks, and Mom had hugged me, but Mark had rolled his eyes and muttered something about showing off. That was Mark, always resentful of anything I did that highlighted his own lack of contribution. I was about to tell them about the new infrastructure project I'd been assigned, a major highway renovation that would be the biggest thing our firm had handled in 5 years, when I heard the front door burst open behind me with such force that the hinges creaked in protest. Mark and Tiffany stormed in, and I mean stormed. They weren't carrying overnight bags or a dish to share for dinner. They were dragging 2 massive suitcases, the expensive hardshell kind that cost $300 each. At Macy's, several designer shopping bags with logos I recognized from the upscale mall across town, and what looked like half of their apartment packed into those clear plastic bins from Target. Tiffany's perfectly manicured nails painted in what I recognized as a fresh gel manicure that probably cost $60 clicked against the handle of her Louis Vuitton carry-on, and her blonde hair was styled in those loose waves that probably cost $200 at whatever high-end salon she frequented. She was wearing Lululemon leggings that ran about $120 and a Tory Burch top I'd seen online for close to $300. Mark looked smug, that same expression he'd worn since we were kids, whenever he'd gotten away with something, whenever Mom and Dad had taken his side in an argument, whenever he'd managed to weasel out of consequences that should have been his to bear. He was wearing work boots that looked brand new, probably Red Wings that cost over $200, and a Carhartt jacket that wasn't cheap either. For someone who claimed to be struggling financially, he and Tiffany certainly didn't dress like it. "We're moving back in," Mark announced, his voice booming with an authority he'd never actually earned, never worked for, never deserved. He didn't phrase it as a question or a request. It was a declaration of fait accompli, and he stood there in the doorway like a conquering hero returning home, like he was doing our parents some kind of favor by gracing them with his presence. Tiffany smirked at me, her glossy lips painted in what looked like a MAC shade that cost $30 curling up at the corners. "Hey, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. She looked me up and down, taking in my sensible work slacks from Kohl's that I'd bought on sale, My wrinkled blouse that I'd thrown on at 5:30 that morning, my practical flats that were comfortable for walking around construction sites. I could see the judgment in her cold blue eyes, that assessment that found me wanting, found me less than. I'd never liked Tiffany from the moment Mark introduced her 6 months ago at a family barbecue. She was a real estate agent, or at least that's what she claimed, though I'd never seen her actually close a deal or talk about her work with any specificity. Whenever anyone asked her about her job, she'd give vague answers about luxury properties and high-end clients, but never any concrete details. She name-dropped, constantly mentioning restaurants I knew cost $200 a plate spa days that ran $500 shopping trips to Kansas City and Chicago that must have cost thousands. I turned to my father, waiting for him to say something to tell Mark that this was ridiculous, that you couldn't just move back into your parents' house without discussing it first, without asking permission, without even giving notice. But Dad just sat there, his jaw set in that stubborn way he had his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past my shoulder, refusing to meet my gaze. I could see a muscle twitching in his cheek, the way it did when he was angry but trying to control it, and I realized with a sinking feeling that he already knew about this, that this wasn't a surprise to him at all. When he finally spoke, his words hit me like a physical blow, like a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. "Sarah, you can move into the living room or you can find your own place," he said flatly. No emotion, no apology, no acknowledgement of how insane this was, how unfair, how completely unacceptable. The fork I'd been holding clattered against my plate, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room like a gunshot. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, all the air leaving my lungs at once, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. For a moment, I just sat there, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. My brain unable to reconcile the casual cruelty of those words with the man who was supposed to be my father, who was supposed to love me, protect me, value me. Then the shock gave way to something else, something hot and explosive that I'd been pushing down for years, for decades, really, every time Mark had gotten preferential treatment, every time my accomplishments had been dismissed, every time I'd been expected to sacrifice while he was coddled and enabled. "Are you serious right now?" I managed to get out, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I've been paying for everything in this house for 3 years, and you're telling me to sleep on the couch or leave." Just like that, without even discussing it with me first. Mark laughed, actually laughed, a harsh braying sound that made me want to throw something at him. Tiffany joined in with this high-pitched giggle that sounded like nails on a chalkboard, like the sound of breaking glass. And she actually put her hand over her mouth like she was trying to be polite about her amusement at my shock and pain. "Come on, sis, don't be so dramatic," Mark said, dropping his bags in the middle of the floor with a thud that shook the pictures on the wall. "We need the space. You've got a good job, you make good money, you can afford your own place. It's time you moved out anyway. You're what, 32? Most people your age don't live with their parents." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor with a screech that made Mom wince. My hands were shaking, my whole body trembling with fury. "Dramatic. Let me tell you what's dramatic, Mark. That refrigerator over there, the stainless steel Samsung with the French doors and the water dispenser, I bought it when the old one died 2 years ago. $1,200. I put it on my credit card and paid it off over 6 months because you all said you couldn't afford it right then." I was on a roll now, my voice getting louder with each word. "That 70-inch TV in the living room, the one we all watched the Super Bowl on, mine. $2,000. The couch you're probably planning to sit on, I bought that last year when the old one literally fell apart. $1,500. The microwave, the coffee maker, the dining room table and chairs, all mine. I've been paying the electric bill every month, that's about $200. The water bill, another $100. I paid for the new roof last summer when you all said you couldn't afford it, when the insurance wouldn't cover it all. That was $8,000, by the way. $8,000 I saved for a down payment on my own place, and I used it to fix your roof. I have the receipts for all of it." I could see Dad's face turning red, that deep crimson that meant his blood pressure was rising. That meant he was getting angry. But I didn't care anymore. I was done caring, done trying to be the good daughter, done sacrificing my own needs and wants and future for people who clearly didn't appreciate it. "Dad, I've also been buying the groceries most weeks. That's another $400 or $500 a month. I paid for the plumber when the toilet broke last spring. $300. I paid for the electrician when the breaker kept tripping. $500. I bought Mom that new washing machine when the old one died. $900. Do you want me to keep going because I can? I have spreadsheets, Dad. I track every penny I spend on this house. Dad's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles bulging. The decision has been made, Sarah. Mark and Tiffany need more space. They're planning for their future. They want to save money for a down payment on a house. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Planning for their future. What about my future? What about the fact that I've put my life on hold to keep this house running while Mark has been floating from job to job, getting fired for showing up late, quitting because he didn't like his boss taking months off between jobs while I covered his car insurance, his rent, his grocery bills? Mark took a step toward me, his face flushed. That's not fair, Sarah. I've had some bad luck, that's all, and I always paid you back. No, Mark, you didn't, I said coldly. You've borrowed over $15,000 from me in the past 3 years. I've gotten back maybe $2,000. I have the bank records to prove it. Every time you needed money for rent, money for your truck payment, money for tools you swore you needed for work, I gave it to you because you're my brother and I thought that's what family did, but you never paid me back. You just kept asking for more. Tiffany's smirk had faded slightly, but she still had that superior look on her face. She examined her nails, looking bored by the whole conversation, like this was all beneath her, like my pain and anger were just inconvenient obstacles to her plans. Mom was standing by the sink, her hands gripping the counter so hard, her knuckles were white, but she said nothing. She just stood there, silent as always, letting Dad make all the decisions, letting Mark walk all over everyone, letting this nightmare unfold without saying a single word in my defense. That hurt almost more than Dad's words that Mom could stand there and say nothing while they kicked me out of my own home, the home I'd been paying to maintain. You know what, fine, I said, and I felt something shift inside me, something cold and final, like a door slamming shut. I'll leave, but I'm taking everything I paid for with me. Every single thing. I didn't wait for a response. I marched straight upstairs to my room, my feet pounding on the stairs I'd paid to have recarpeted last year, another $1,200 I'd spent on this house. I started pulling clothes off hangers, throwing them into suitcases and garbage bags. I could hear them talking downstairs, Mark's voice loud and dismissive. Tiffany's laugh cutting through the air like nails on a chalkboard, Dad's angry muttering, Mom's silence. I packed methodically everything I owned that had any value or meaning. My laptop, my tablet, my books, my jewelry, my photos. Then I grabbed the files I kept in my closet, the ones with all my financial records, all the receipts and bank statements and credit card bills that proved exactly how much I'd invested in this house. I shoved them in a backpack along with my passport and birth certificate and social security card, all the important documents they could use against me if I left them here. But I didn't just pack my personal belongings. I went back downstairs, and the look on their faces when they saw what I was doing was almost worth the pain and humiliation of the evening. I unplugged that 70-inch TV, the one we'd all been watching just last week during Sunday football, the one Dad had specifically requested I buy because he wanted to be able to see the game better. I unhooked all the cables, the HDMI cords, and the power strip and the soundbar I'd also purchased another $300. I started carrying it toward the door, struggling with the weight, but determined not to ask for help. Mark appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed, that smirk still on his face. You're actually taking the TV. That's pathetic, Sarah. Real mature. What are you going to do? Take the furniture too? I didn't respond. I just kept moving, carrying that TV out to my SUV, the Subaru Outback I'd bought 2 years ago brand new with my own money that I'd saved. I opened the back hatch and carefully loaded it in, making sure it was secure. Then I went back for more. The coffee maker, the expensive Breville espresso machine I'd bought last Christmas, $500. The living room end tables from West Elm, $400 for the set. The set of pots and pans from Williams Sonoma, the ones I'd bought when Mom complained the old ones were so worn out that food kept sticking, $600. The KitchenAid mixer I'd gotten her for Mother's Day, $350. The set of Wusthof kitchen knives, $400. The Ninja blender, $150. Tiffany had come out onto the porch now watching with her arms crossed. This is so petty, she called out. You're really going to strip the house bare? I'm taking what's mine, I called back. Everything I'm taking, I have a receipt for. I paid for it with my own money. If you want these things, buy your own. I went back for the microwave, the newer one I'd bought 8 months ago when the old one stopped working, $200. The vacuum cleaner, the Dyson I'd purchased because the old one had lost all suction, $400. The air purifier in the living room, $300. The set of towels in the bathroom, $150. The shower curtain and bath mat, another $60. Dad appeared at some point, his face bright red, now his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was shaking with rage, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to physically stop me. "Sarah, stop this right now," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You're making a fool of yourself. You're embarrassing this family." I straightened up my arms full of the throw pillows I'd bought for the couch and looked him right in the eye. "No, Dad, I'm taking back what's mine. You made your choice. You chose Mark over me. You chose to kick me out without notice, without discussion, without any consideration for everything I've done for this family. So I'm taking my things and I'm leaving, just like you told me to." "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Those things are for the house. They belong to everyone." "No, they don't," I said calmly, even though inside I was screaming. "They belong to me. I bought them. I have the receipts. If you want to try to stop me, you can call the police, but I guarantee you they're going to ask for proof of ownership and I have it. Do you?" He didn't answer, just stood there fuming, and I went back inside for more. The lamps in the living room, $250 for the set. The curtains in the dining room, $180. The wall art I'd hung last spring, $300. The bookshelf in the hallway, $200. The coat rack by the door, $80. Mark was getting angrier now, his voice rising. "You can't take all of this. What are we supposed to use?" "I don't know, Mark," I said sweetly. "Maybe you can buy your own things with all that money you're going to save by living here rent-free." "Oh, wait, that's right. You don't actually save money, do you? You just spend it on expensive clothes and eating out and whatever else while other people cover your basic needs." Tiffany put a hand on Mark's arm and I saw her whisper something to him. He nodded and they both went back inside. I didn't care. I just kept loading things into my SUV, making trip after trip until I'd taken everything I could fit. The last thing I grabbed was the set of good dishes from the dining room cabinet, the Linux set I'd bought for Thanksgiving 2 years ago, $500. As I was wrapping them in newspaper to protect them, Mom finally spoke. "Sarah, please," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't leave like this." I looked at her, really looked at her. At this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to be kind and generous and selfless, but who'd never taught me that those qualities shouldn't come at the expense of my own well-being. "You could have stopped this, Mom. You could have told Dad that this was wrong, that you can't just kick someone out without notice, especially someone who's been paying your bills for 3 years. But you didn't say anything. You never say anything." "Your father had already decided," she said weakly. "You know how he is." "Yes, I do know how he is," I said. "And I know how you are too. You let him make all the decisions even when they're wrong, even when they hurt people, even when they hurt your own daughter. You're his enabler. Mom, just like you're Mark's enabler. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace, but what you're really doing is choosing the path of least resistance, no matter who gets hurt in the process." Her face crumpled, tears starting to stream down her cheeks, but I couldn't comfort her. I didn't have it in me anymore. I finished wrapping the dishes, loaded them carefully into a box, and carried them to my car. By the time I was done, my SUV was packed to the ceiling. I couldn't fit. Everything had to leave behind some of the smaller items, but I'd gotten most of it. As I closed the back hatch, I turned to look at the house one last time. Dad was standing on the porch, his arms still crossed, his face still red with anger. Mark and Tiffany were visible through the window, already moving their things into what had been my room. Mom was crying on the steps, her face in her hands. I got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and looked at them all one more time through the windshield. Then I put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I watched the house get smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared around a corner. I drove straight to an extended stay hotel on the west side of town, the one near the shopping center that I'd passed 100 times but never paid attention to. I checked in for a week paid with my credit card and had the front desk clerk help me carry some of my things up to the room on the second floor. The room was small and impersonal with beige walls and generic art and that particular smell that all hotel rooms seem to have some combination of cleaning products and air freshener and the ghosts of 1,000 previous occupants. I set the TV up on the dresser plugged in the coffee maker on the bathroom counter and then just stood there in the middle of the room, surrounded by boxes and bags and the physical evidence of 3 years of my life. I should have cried. I should have broken down, should have called someone, should have done something. But I just felt numb, hollowed out like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that made me human, leaving behind just an empty shell going through the motions. I sat on the edge of the bed, still made up with the hotel's cheap, scratchy sheets, and stared at the wall. I replayed the evening over and over in my mind, analyzing every word, every expression, trying to understand how my own family could treat me like I was disposable, like I was nothing more than a convenient source of money and labor to be discarded the moment something better came along. The worst part was that I'd seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years. The way Dad always took Mark's side in any disagreement. The way Mom made excuses for Mark's behavior, but held me to impossible standards. The way my accomplishments were dismissed as expected as nothing special, while Mark's most basic adulting was celebrated like a major achievement. The way my contributions to the household were taken for granted as if it was simply my duty as the responsible child to subsidize everyone else's lives. I'd told myself it would get better. I'd told myself that once I got back on my feet financially, once I'd rebuilt my savings after the move from Chicago, once I'd established myself more firmly in my career here in Omaha, things would change. I'd be able to move out on my own terms, leave on good terms, maintain a healthy relationship with my family, while also having my own independent life. But tonight had shown me the truth. It was never going to get better. They were never going to appreciate me. They were never going to value me. I was always going to be the responsible one, the one who sacrificed, the one who gave and gave and gave, while Mark took and took and took. I finally lay down on the bed around midnight, still fully clothed, and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of packing and moving and that look on Dad's face when he told me to leave that cold indifference that said I didn't matter that I never had. The next morning, I woke up at 6, my body trained by years of early alarm clocks and long commutes. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and then it all came crashing back. I was in a hotel. I'd been kicked out of my home. My family had chosen Mark over me. I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years, sent an email to my supervisor saying I had a family emergency and needed a few days. Then I opened my laptop and started apartment hunting. I spent 3 days looking at places, driving all over Omaha, seeing everything from studio apartments in sketchy neighborhoods to overpriced lofts downtown. Nothing felt right. Everything was too expensive or too small or too far from work or too close to my parents' house or just had a bad vibe that made my skin crawl. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown Omaha in an older building that had been recently renovated. It was small, maybe 700 square feet, but it had hardwood floors that had been refinished, updated appliances, and most importantly, it was mine. The rent was $850 a month plus utilities, which was manageable on my salary, and the landlord said I could move in immediately if I had first month last month and a security deposit ready. I wrote the check right there, watching as 3 months' worth of rent disappeared from my checking account in an instant. The landlord, a middle-aged Vietnamese woman named Mrs. Nguyen, handed me the keys and a lease to sign, and just like that, I had my own place. I moved in that weekend, making trip after trip from the hotel to the apartment, carrying boxes up 2 flights of stairs because the building didn't have an elevator. Everything I'd taken from my parents' house looked ridiculous in the small space. The 70-inch TV dominated the living room wall. The dining table and chairs barely fit in the kitchen nook. The end tables looked oversized and out of place. But it was mine. All of it was mine, and no one could take it away from me, and no one could kick me out without notice, and no one could tell me I had to give up my space for someone else who deserved it more. Gloria from work called me on Saturday afternoon, having heard through the office grapevine that something was going on. Gloria was one of those people who radiated warmth and confidence, a black woman in her 40s who'd raised 3 kids on her own after her husband died and didn't take nonsense from anyone. She was a senior project manager, had been with the firm for 15 years, and had taken me under her wing when I first started. "Hey girl, I heard you moved," she said. "You need help unpacking." I told her I was fine, that I had it under control, but she showed up anyway 20 minutes later with her daughter Keisha, who was home from college for the weekend. They helped me unpack boxes, arrange furniture, hang curtains, and generally turn the empty apartment into something that felt like a home. When I told Gloria what had happened, she just shook her head and said, "Baby, you did the right thing. Family doesn't mean they get to use you as a doormat. I know it hurts, but sometimes you have to love people from a distance." She convinced me to join her yoga class on Tuesday nights, said it would help with the stress. I went reluctantly at first, showing up to the community center in leggings and an old t-shirt, feeling self-conscious and out of place among all the people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. But there was something calming about it, about focusing on my breath and my body instead of the constant loop of anger and hurt in my head. The instructor, a serene woman in her 50s named Patricia, had a soothing voice that guided us through the poses, and by the end of the hour, long class, I felt more relaxed than I had in weeks. But even as I tried to settle into my new life, I couldn't shake my suspicions about Tiffany. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. She drove a brand new Lexus RX 350, a vehicle that cost at least $50,000. She wore designer clothes head to toe, and I'm not talking about department store designer, I'm talking about Gucci and Prada and Balenciaga. She always had fresh manicures and pedicures, and her hair color and cut looked like it cost at least $300 every 6 weeks. She talked about spa days and shopping trips and expensive dinners like they were nothing. Real estate agents in Omaha could make decent money, sure. The good ones, the experienced ones with established client bases and multiple sales a year, could pull in 6 figures. But Tiffany had only been licensed for a year and a half. I'd asked Mark about it once casually, and he'd been vague about how many houses she'd actually sold. And when I'd tried to look her up on the real estate board website, her profile was minimal, with only 2 properties listed as sold in the past year, both small condos that wouldn't have generated much commission. The math didn't add up. Even if she was making $80,000 or $90,000 a year, which seemed generous given her limited experience and sales record, that wasn't the kind of money that supported a lifestyle that probably cost twice that much. And now she was moving in with my parents, supposedly to save money for a down payment, but everything about her screamed money to burn. I mentioned it to Gloria one evening after yoga as we were grabbing smoothies at the place next door to the community center. "You think she's dirty?" Gloria asked, sipping her green smoothie through a metal straw. "I don't know," I admitted, "but something doesn't add up. She's either making way more money than is reasonable for someone at her level, or she's spending money she doesn't have, or she's getting money from somewhere else." Gloria gave me a look. "You thinking about looking into it?" "I don't know. Maybe. They're not going to listen to me anyway. Dad made that pretty clear, but I can't just sit back and watch her potentially scam my family as much as they might deserve it right now." "Be careful," Gloria warned. "If she is up to something, she's not going to take kindly to you poking around. And if she's not, you're going to look like you're just trying to cause problems." 2 weeks after I'd moved out, I ran into Michael Chen at a networking event downtown, one of those professional mixers where engineers and architects and contractors all stood around with drinks and business cards and tried to make connections that might lead to future work. Michael had been a colleague when I worked in Chicago, but he'd since moved to Omaha and gotten into commercial real estate development. He was smart, sharp, and had a reputation for doing his due diligence on every deal and every person he worked with. We grabbed coffee afterward at a late-night cafe that was surprisingly busy for 10 o'clock on a Thursday, and after some small talk about work and Chicago and how we were both adjusting to life in Omaha, I casually asked if he knew anything about Tiffany Stone. Michael's expression changed immediately. The easy smile disappeared, replaced by something guarded and serious. He set down his coffee cup and leaned in, his voice dropping. "Sarah, what's your connection to her?" "She's dating my brother," I said, and I felt that knot in my stomach again, that sense that I was about to hear something I didn't want to know but needed to. Michael was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Then he said, "Look, I don't usually talk about this stuff, especially not in public, but since it's your family, you should know. Tiffany Stone is under investigation. There are questions about some of her transactions, inflated property valuations, potential embezzlement of client funds, forged documents. Nothing's been proven yet, and she hasn't been charged with anything, but there's definitely smoke. My buddy who works for the State Real Estate Commission basically told me to stay far away from any deals with her name on them. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My hands started shaking, and I had to set my own coffee cup down before I spilled it. Are you sure? Could it be a mistake? Could someone else be causing problems and she's just caught up in it? Michael shook his head. From what I understand, it's all her. She's got a pattern. She works with first-time homebuyers, people who don't know the process, and she takes advantage of that ignorance. Inflates appraisals, skims money out of escrow accounts, forges signatures on documents. She's careful, covers her tracks pretty well, but there have been enough complaints that the state board is looking into it. I'm sorry, Sarah. I know that's not what you want to hear about someone your brother is involved with. I thanked him and left the coffee shop in a daze, walking to my car in the parking garage with my mind racing. My brother was living with a criminal, possibly bringing her into my parents' home, where she'd have access to all their financial information, all their personal documents, all their vulnerabilities. And knowing Mark, he probably had no idea. He was trusting and naive when it came to people he wanted to believe and always seeing the best in everyone until reality came crashing down. I sat in my car for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of it to let Mark and my parents deal with whatever mess Tiffany created. They'd made it clear they didn't value my input, didn't trust my judgment, didn't want me involved in their lives unless it was to provide money or labor. Why should I care what happened to them? But I couldn't. Despite everything, they were still my family. And more than that, I couldn't stand by and watch someone deliberately hurt them, even if they were too blind or stubborn to see it coming. I called my parents that night, my heart pounding as the phone rang. Dad answered on the third ring, and I could hear the TV in the background, some sports game he was watching. Dad, I need to tell you something about Tiffany. I started, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I don't want to hear it, Sarah, he interrupted before I could even explain. You're just jealous because Mark found someone. You're trying to cause problems because you're bitter about moving out. Dad, please just listen to me for 1 minute, I pleaded. This isn't about being jealous or bitter. I talked to someone in the real estate industry today, and there are serious concerns about Tiffany's business practices. She's under investigation for fraud, for embezzlement, for forging documents. This is serious. That's enough, he snapped, his voice rising. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you spread gossip and lies about your brother's girlfriend. She's been nothing but kind and generous to this family. She's helping Mark get his life together. She's given us great advice about refinancing the house to get a better interest rate. You're just trying to interfere in your brother's life because you can't stand to see him happy. The words hit me like a slap. Refinancing, Dad? What are you talking about? The house was paid off. Why would you refinance a house that's paid off? That's none of your business anymore, Sarah. You don't live here. What we do with our property is our concern, not yours, he said coldly. Dad, please listen to me. If Tiffany is involved in your finances, if she's helping you with refinancing or any other financial decisions, you need to be very careful. I'm trying to protect you. This isn't about Mark or being jealous. This is about keeping you and Mom safe from someone who might be trying to take advantage of you. We're done with this conversation, he said flatly. Don't call here with this garbage again. Mark is happy. Tiffany is good for him, and you need to let it go and focus on your own life. The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling utterly helpless. I'd tried to warn him, and he'd shut me down completely, and now he'd admitted that Tiffany was involved in their financial decisions. A house that was paid off being refinanced. That was a massive red flag, and he couldn't even see it. I tried calling Mom the next day, hoping she might be more receptive, that maybe without Dad listening, she'd be willing to hear me out. She answered after 6 rings, her voice cautious. Mom, it's me. I need to talk to you about Tiffany. Sarah, honey, your father already told me about your call last night, she said, and I could hear that pleading tone she always used when she wanted to avoid conflict. Mark is happy, sweetheart. That's all that matters. He's finally found someone who believes in him, who supports him. Don't stir up trouble, please. Mom, this isn't about stirring up trouble, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. This is about the truth. What if she's using him? What if she's using all of you? Dad said something about refinancing the house. Mom, why would you refinance a house that's paid off? That doesn't make any financial sense unless you need cash, and if you need cash, why didn't you tell me I could have helped? We don't need your help, Sarah, she said, and there was an edge to her voice I rarely heard. We're managing just fine. Tiffany explained it all to us. It's something about interest rates and investments. I don't understand all the details, but she's a professional and she knows what she's doing. Your father trusts her and Mark trusts her, so I trust her too. Mom, please just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll read everything before you sign it. Promise me you'll get a second opinion from a lawyer or a financial advisor who isn't connected to Tiffany. I have to go, Sarah. Your father needs me, she said, and the line went dead just like it had with Dad. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by all the things I'd taken from their house, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I'd tried to warn them, and they'd shut me down completely. They'd chosen to believe Tiffany a woman they'd known for 6 months over me, their daughter, who'd been supporting them for 3 years. Part of me wanted to just walk away to let them deal with whatever mess Tiffany created. They were adults. They'd made their choice. If they wanted to trust a con artist over their own daughter, that was their problem, not mine. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't just abandon them to be victimized even if they refused to see the danger. So I started digging, doing my own investigation, determined to get proof that even they couldn't deny. I reached out to Hazel Morrison, an old family friend who'd worked in real estate law for 30 years before retiring last year. Hazel had been like an aunt to me, growing up, someone who'd attended my school plays and graduation ceremonies, who'd sent me care packages when I was in college, who'd always had a kind word and a listening ear. I drove out to her house in Lincoln one Saturday morning, the hour-long drive giving me time to organize my thoughts. Hazel's house was exactly as I remembered it, a charming Victorian with a wraparound porch and flower boxes in the windows. She answered the door with a warm hug and ushered me into her kitchen where she already had coffee brewing and fresh cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter. "Sarah, sweetheart, it's so good to see you," she said, pouring us both coffee. "But I can tell something's wrong. Tell me what's going on." I told her everything, starting with that awful dinner and working my way through to my conversation with Michael Chin and my parents' refusal to listen to my warnings. Hazel listened carefully, her sharp eyes never leaving my face, and I could see her expression growing more and more concerned as I talked. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. Then she sighed heavily. "Sarah, honey, I'm going to tell you something, but you have to promise you won't say where you heard it. I'm retired now, but I still have friends in the industry and they talk to me. Can you promise me that?" I promised, my heart starting to pound. "I know about Tiffany Stone," Hazel said quietly. "She was involved in a case a few years back in Lincoln before she moved to Omaha. Forged signatures on closing documents, inflated property values to get larger mortgages approved, diverted funds that were supposed to go into escrow accounts. The case never went to trial because the victims, a young couple who were first-time homebuyers, settled out of court. They were scared and broke and just wanted it to be over. But everyone in the industry knows what happened. She's a con artist, Sarah, and a good one. She's smart, she's charming, she knows how to gain people's trust, and she knows how to cover her tracks." My hands were shaking so badly I had to set down my coffee cup. What should I do? They won't listen to me. They think I'm just causing trouble. Hazel reached across the table and took my hand. "Document everything. If she's living with your parents, she has access to their finances, their mail, their personal information. Watch for any unusual transactions, any paperwork they sign, any changes to their accounts. And Sarah, be prepared for the possibility that they won't believe you even when you have proof. Sometimes people can't admit they've been conned until it's too late, until they've lost everything. The shame is too great." I thanked her and drove back to Omaha with a sick feeling in my stomach that wouldn't go away. That night, I called Michael again and asked if he could look into something for me. I gave him my parents' address and asked if there were any recent mortgages or liens filed against the property. "Sarah, are you sure you want to go down this road?" he asked. "If there is something there, it's going to be bad, and your family might not thank you for uncovering it." I'm sure," I said. "I need to know." 3 days later, he called me back. I was at work in the middle of reviewing blueprints for the highway project when my phone rang. I stepped out into the hallway to take the call. Sarah, you need to sit down for this, Michael said, his voice grim. Just tell me, I said, even though I already knew it was going to be bad. There's a new mortgage on your parents' house. It was filed 6 weeks ago, right around the time Mark and Tiffany moved in. The lender is listed as Pinnacle Financial Services, which sounds legitimate, but when I dug deeper, it's a shell company. Registered in Delaware, minimal web presence, no physical office that I can find. The amount of the mortgage is $250,000, Sarah, on a house that was completely paid off. I felt dizzy, my vision narrowing. $250,000, I repeated numbly. There's more, Michael continued, his voice heavy. I called in a favor from a friend who works at one of the banks your parents use. I can't tell you how I got this information, and you can never repeat where it came from, but there have been large withdrawals from accounts associated with your parents' names over the past 2 months. We're talking about 50,000 here, 30,000 there. Someone's been systematically draining their savings and retirement accounts. I couldn't breathe. My parents had worked their entire lives to build up those savings. Dad had worked at the same manufacturing plant for 40 years before retiring. Mom had been a school secretary for 35 years. They'd lived modestly saved, carefully planned for a comfortable retirement. And now, someone was stealing it all. It's Tiffany, I said, and it wasn't a question. I can't prove it directly, Michael said, but the timing is suspicious as hell. She moves in and suddenly there's a mortgage from a sketchy lender and massive withdrawals from savings accounts. At the very least, she's involved. At worst, she's orchestrating the whole thing. What do I do? I asked, my voice breaking. You need to get them to talk to a lawyer. Now. Today, if possible. And you need to report this to the police and to the State Real Estate Commission. Even if your parents won't cooperate, there needs to be a record of these concerns. I thanked him and ended the call, then stood in the hallway of my office building for a solid 5 minutes trying to process what I'd just learned. $250,000 in new debt. Tens of thousands stolen from their savings. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built being drained away by a con artist they'd welcomed into their home. I tried calling Dad again, but he wouldn't even answer my calls now. I tried Mom, and she picked up, but immediately said, Sarah, I can't talk to you about this. Your father said you're not to call here anymore with these accusations. Mom, please, I'm not making accusations. I have proof. There's a mortgage on the house for $250,000. Did you know about that? Did you sign those papers? There was a long silence, and then she said quietly, Tiffany handled all of that. She said it was for investment purposes, that we'd make more money in the long run. She showed us numbers and charts. It all made sense when she explained it. Mom, did you read the papers before you signed them? Another long silence. Your father signed them. I signed where he told me to sign. We trusted Tiffany Sarah. She's Mark's girlfriend. She's practically family. Why would she hurt us? Because she's a con artist, Mom. Because that's what she does. She gains people's trust and then she steals from them. I have proof. I know about the mortgage. I know about the withdrawals from your savings accounts. Mom, you need to stop this before she takes everything. I have to go, Mom said, her voice shaking. I can't talk about this anymore. She hung up and I stood there in my apartment feeling utterly helpless. I'd tried to warn them, I'd presented facts, I'd begged them to protect themselves, and they still wouldn't listen. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I filed a report with the Omaha Police Department's fraud division laying out everything I knew about Tiffany, the suspicious mortgage, the drained accounts, the previous allegations in Lincoln. The detective I spoke with, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Detective Kowalski, listened carefully and took notes, but he was frank with me. Without a complaint from the actual victims, there's not much we can do, he said. If your parents aren't willing to say they've been defrauded, we can't investigate. But I'll keep this report on file, and if we get other complaints about her, it'll help build a case. I also filed a detailed complaint with the Nebraska Real Estate Commission, documenting everything I'd learned and everything Michael and Hazel had told me. The woman I spoke with said they'd add it to Tiffany's file and continue their investigation, but these things took time. Time my parents didn't have. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of constant anxiety, checking online real estate records, obsessively watching for any new liens or mortgages, trying to figure out how to save people who didn't want to be saved. Gloria finally sat me down after yoga one night and said gently, Sarah, you can't protect people from themselves. You've done everything you can. At some point, you have to let them experience the consequences of their choices. But it's my family, I said, and I was crying now, tears streaming down my face. I can't just watch them lose everything. Baby, you're not watching them lose everything. They're choosing to ignore your warnings. They're choosing to trust a con artist over their own daughter. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. All you can do is be ready to help them pick up the pieces when it all falls apart, if you even want to do that. I knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier. 3 weeks after my conversation with Michael on a Thursday afternoon when I was at work reviewing structural calculations, my phone started buzzing repeatedly. I looked down and saw 7 missed calls from Mom, 3 from an unknown number, and 2 voicemails. My heart started racing as I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into an empty conference room to listen to the messages. The first one was from Mom, her voice high and panicked. "Sarah, you need to come home right now. There are people here, they're asking about Tiffany. They have badges. I don't know what to do. Please come home." The second was from the unknown number. "Ms. Patterson, this is Agent Morales from the Nebraska Attorney General's office. Your mother gave me your number. We're at your parents' residence investigating allegations of fraud. Your presence would be helpful. Please call me back at this number." I didn't even grab my purse. I just ran out of the office, told my supervisor there was a family emergency, and sprinted to my car in the parking garage. I made the 20-minute drive in 12 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, my mind racing through every possible scenario. When I pulled up to my parents' house, there were 2 sedans in the driveway. I didn't recognize both of them, dark and official-looking. The front door was open, and I could see people moving around inside. I ran up to the door and found Mom sitting on the couch. Her face pale and tear streaked her hands, shaking in her lap. Dad was standing by the window, his face gray, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the 3 weeks since I'd last seen him. Mark was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, his face red and splotchy, his movements jerky and agitated. 2 people in business suits were standing in the living room, both holding folders and leather portfolios. One was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes, wearing a navy suit that spoke of authority and experience. The other was a younger man, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and an expression that was professional but not unkind. The woman turned to me as I entered. "Are you Sarah Patterson?" "Yes," I said, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what was happening. "I'm Agent Morales with the Nebraska Attorney General's Office Consumer Protection Division," she said, showing me her badge. "This is Agent Reeves. We're investigating Tiffany Stone for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Your parents are potential victims. We've been tracking Ms. Stone for several months now, and we have multiple complaints from other victims. We need to ask your parents some questions." I looked at Mom, who was crying silently, and then at Dad, who looked like he might be sick. Mark stopped pacing and turned to me, his face a mask of anger and confusion, and something that might have been fear. "This is bullshit," Mark said, his voice too loud in the quiet room. "Sarah put you up to this, didn't she? She's been trying to break us up for months. She's jealous because I found someone and she's alone. This is all her fault." Agent Reeves held up his hand. "Sir, I need you to calm down. We're here because we've received multiple complaints and have been conducting our own investigation for several months. This has nothing to do with your sister. We didn't even know she'd filed a report until we came here today and your mother mentioned her." Mark lunged toward Agent Morales. "You're lying. Tiffany didn't do anything wrong. She's been helping us. She got my parents a great deal on a refinance. She's been investing their money so they can make more in retirement. She loves me. We're getting married." I felt something break inside me, looking at my brother, seeing the desperation in his eyes, the need to believe that Tiffany was real, that the relationship was real, that he hadn't been played for a fool. Agent Morales' expression softened slightly. "Mr. Patterson, I understand this is difficult to hear, but we have evidence that Ms. Stone has defrauded multiple families in the Omaha and Lincoln areas over the past 3 years. She targets people who trust her often through family connections or romantic relationships. She gains access to their financial information and systematically drains their accounts while making it look like legitimate transactions." "Where's Tiffany?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "We're trying to locate her," Agent Reeves said. "She hasn't been at her listed office address in 3 days, and she's not responding to calls. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. We've checked the townhouse she and your brother were renting before they moved here, and the landlord says she cleared out her things a week ago without giving notice." Mark's face went white. "What? No, that's not right. Our stuff is still there. We were going to move it all here this weekend." "Your stuff might still be there, sir," Agent Reeves said gently, "but Ms. Stone's personal belongings are gone. The landlord has photos. She took everything of value: designer clothes, jewelry, electronics, and left the rest." Mark sank down onto a kitchen chair, his face in his hands. "No, this isn't happening. She said she loved me. She said we were going to get married, buy a house together, start a family." I wanted to feel triumphant, wanted to feel vindicated that I'd been right all along, but all I felt was sick. Sick for my brother who'd been conned by someone he loved. Sick for my parents who'd trusted the wrong person and were about to lose everything. Agent Morales opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you about some transactions. This mortgage for $250,000 from Pinnacle Financial Services. Did you apply for this mortgage?" Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tiffany handled it. She said it was a good investment opportunity, that we could use the money to invest in some properties she was developing. She said we'd double our money in a year." "And did you read these mortgage documents before you signed them?" "She explained them to us," Mom said, her voice shaking. "There was a lot of legal language. We trusted her. Mark trusted her. She's been so good to us." Agent Morales pulled out more documents. "What about these withdrawals from your savings accounts? $50,000 here, $30,000 there, $15,000 here. Did you authorize these?" I watched as my parents looked at each other, and I could see the moment the reality crashed down on them, the moment they realized they'd been completely and thoroughly conned. "She said those were transfers into investment accounts," Dad said, his voice breaking. "She showed us statements every month, said our money was growing, said we'd made 15% returns in the first quarter alone." "Those statements were fake," Agent Reeves said, not unkindly. "The accounts they referenced don't exist. The money you transferred went into accounts controlled by Ms. Stone or her associates. As far as we can tell, she's taken approximately $400,000 from you in total. The mortgage, the savings withdrawals, and several credit cards she opened in your names." Mom made a sound like a wounded animal, and Dad just stood there, swaying slightly like he might fall over. Mark was still sitting with his face in his hands, and I could see his shoulders shaking. "What about the house?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Can they keep the house?" Agent Morales shook her head. "The mortgage is legally binding. They signed the documents. Unless they can pay off the $250,000, the lender can foreclose, and Pinnacle Financial Services, despite being a shell company, has legal standing to collect. We're trying to trace the company back to Ms. Stone, but she's covered her tracks well." "How long do they have?" I asked. "The mortgage documents your parents signed have an acceleration clause. If they miss a single payment, the entire amount becomes due immediately. The first payment was due last week. They haven't paid it. Foreclosure proceedings will likely begin within 30 days. The room was silent except for Mom's quiet crying. I looked around at my family, at the house I'd grown up in, at all the memories and the years and the life that had been built here, and I realized it was all gone. Everything they'd worked for gone, because they'd trusted the wrong person, because they'd been too stubborn to listen to warnings, because they'd chosen someone they barely knew over their own daughter. The front door suddenly burst open, and we all turned to see Tiffany standing there, looking surprised to see the crowd. She was carrying shopping bags from Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue, her hair and makeup perfect, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment used to be. She saw the agents, and her face flickered through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, calculation, fear, and then settling into a mask of confused innocence. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice high and concerned. "Mark, baby, what are all these people doing here?" Before Agent Morales could speak, before anyone could stop me, I was moving. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recording app, and hit record, holding it up so it would capture everything clearly. "Tiffany," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I know what you did. The mortgage, the withdrawals from my parents' retirement accounts, all of it. It's over." She looked at me, and for just a second I saw the mask slip, saw the cold calculation behind those pretty blue eyes. Then she smiled, and it was the cruelest smile I'd ever seen. "Do you," she asked, her voice changing, losing that breathy quality she always used, becoming harder, sharper. Do you really know what I did? The investigators are here, I said, gesturing to Agent Morales and Agent Reeves. They have evidence. They've been tracking you for months. It's over Tiffany. She laughed, actually laughed, and set down her shopping bags carefully on the porch. You know what? You're right. I did it. I took every penny I could get my hands on. The mortgage, the savings accounts, the credit cards I opened in their names, all of it. Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Tiff, what are you saying? Why would you say that? She turned to look at him, and there was no warmth in her eyes, no affection, nothing but contempt. Oh, Mark. Sweet, stupid Mark. I needed someone gullible enough to give me access to his family's finances, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. You were perfect, desperate for approval, eager to believe that someone actually saw potential in you. Your father signed anything I put in front of him. The man didn't even read the documents before signing them. Do you know how easy this was? But you said you loved me, Mark said, his voice breaking. You said we were going to get married. I said what I needed to say to make this work, Tiffany said dismissively. Did you really think someone like me would be interested in someone like you? You're a 34-year-old man who can't hold down a job, who lives off his family, who has nothing to offer except access to his parents' money. You were useful, Mark. That's all you ever were. Agent Morales was already moving toward Tiffany, pulling handcuffs from her belt. Ms. Stone, you need to come with us. You have the right to remain silent. But before she could reach her, Tiffany held up her hand. She looked at me at my phone that was still recording, and she smiled again. You want a confession? Fine. I'll give you one. I targeted this family specifically. I looked for someone weak, someone desperate for attention, and I found Mark. I researched your family, found out about the house that was paid off, the retirement savings, all of it. I seduced Mark, moved in with him, made him trust me. Then I convinced him we should move in with his parents to save money for our future, when really I just needed access to their mail, their bank statements, their financial documents. She was speaking directly to my phone, now making sure every word was captured. I forged their signatures on mortgage documents. I created fake investment accounts and transferred their savings into accounts I controlled. I opened credit cards in their names and maxed them out, buying things I wanted. I stole $400,000 from them, and they didn't even notice until it was too late. They were so easy to manipulate, so eager to believe that I was helping them, that I cared about them. They deserved to lose it all for being so stupidly trusting. Mom was crying openly now, and Dad looked like he might be sick. Mark was sitting absolutely still, his face frozen in an expression of complete devastation. Why? I asked, even though I didn't really need to know, even though understanding her motivations wouldn't change anything. Why do this to people? Why hurt them like this? Tiffany shrugged, her expression utterly indifferent to the pain she'd caused. Because I can. Because people are Mark's resources to be exploited. Your family wanted so badly to believe that everyone is good, that family means something, that love is real. It doesn't. People are just walking wallets waiting to be emptied. Your parents are fools, and Mark is an idiot, and that's not my fault. That's their fault for being so naive. And me, I asked. You knew I was suspicious. You knew I was investigating you. Oh, Sarah, she said with a laugh. You were the only one with half a brain in this family. I knew from the start you'd be a problem. That's why I made sure Mark and your parents saw you as the enemy. Every time you tried to warn them, every time you questioned me, I just played the victim, made them think you were jealous, bitter, trying to ruin Mark's happiness. They wanted to believe you were the problem, so that's what they saw. You actually made this easier. They were so busy defending me from you that they didn't notice what I was really doing. Agent Morales had her handcuffs ready now, and she was approaching Tiffany carefully. Ms. Stone, you need to come with us now. Tiffany looked at me one more time. You think you've won, but you haven't. You've just destroyed what's left of your family. They'll never forgive you for this, for being right, for not being able to save them. You're going to be alone, Sarah, and that's worse than anything I did to them. Then before Agent Morales could reach her, before anyone could react, Tiffany turned and ran. She sprinted to her Lexus SUV, which was parked at the curb, jumped in and started the engine. Agent Reeves ran after her, shouting for her to stop, but she peeled out tires, squealing on the pavement, leaving black rubber marks on the street. Both agents ran to their cars, calling for backup on their radios, and within seconds they were speeding after her, sirens wailing. The whole thing had taken maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like it had happened in slow motion. I stood there on the porch, my phone still in my hand, still recording even though Tiffany was gone. I stopped the recording and saved it, then backed it up to cloud storage immediately, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. When I turned back to the house, my family was exactly where I'd left them. Mom on the couch crying. Dad by the window looking like his whole world had collapsed. Mark at the kitchen table, his face still buried in his hands. I walked inside slowly, feeling like I was moving through water, like everything was happening at half speed. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence was suffocating. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, Mark looked up at me. His eyes were red, his face blotchy, and he looked younger somehow, like a little boy who'd just had his heart broken for the first time. "You were right," he said, his voice barely audible. "You tried to tell us and we wouldn't listen. She used me. She never loved me. I was just a tool to get to Mom and Dad's money." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to comfort him, but I was also still angry, still hurt by the way he'd treated me, by the way he'd laughed when I was kicked out, by the way he'd called me jealous and bitter when I'd tried to warn him. "I'm sorry," he said, and he started crying, these huge, gulping sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm so sorry, Sarah, for everything, for laughing at you when Dad kicked you out, for not standing up for you, for believing her instead of you. I'm sorry." Mom was crying too, reaching out for me with shaking hands. "Sarah, baby, we made such a terrible mistake. We should have listened to you. We should have trusted you. You tried to tell us and we pushed you away. Please, please, forgive us." Dad was still standing by the window, but I could see tears running down his face. He turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life I saw my father cry. "I failed you," he said, his voice breaking. "I chose wrong. I always chose wrong. I favored Mark because I thought he needed more help, but what I really did was enable him and punish you for being strong. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from all of us. And now we've lost everything because we were too stubborn to listen to the one person who was trying to help us." I stood there looking at my broken family, and I felt absolutely nothing. No triumph, no vindication, no satisfaction at being right. Just a vast emptiness where my feelings for them used to be. Agent Morales called me an hour later. They'd caught Tiffany trying to get on Interstate 80 heading east. She'd resisted arrest, tried to run again, but they'd taken her into custody. They had my recording, which combined with the evidence they'd already gathered, was more than enough to charge her with multiple felonies. "Your recording was crucial," Agent Morales said. "It's a full confession. With that and the paper trail we've been building, she's looking at serious prison time. We're going to need you to come in and give a formal statement, but you did good work, Ms. Patterson. You might have just saved other families from being victimized." I thanked her and hung up, but I felt no sense of victory. Tiffany would go to prison, but my family had still lost everything. The confession didn't change that.